The Alpha King hid his identity to test his future Luna. Only one Omega treated him like family. Alpha King Damian Ashford stood at the window of his study, looking out over the packlands that stretched beyond the castle walls. The sun was setting, painting the forest in gold and orange, but Damian felt none of the peace that such a view usually gave him. His mind was heavy with a decision that would shape the rest of his life. For 3 years, Damian had ruled the Silver Crescent pack alone. He had taken the throne young, after his father died in a border war, and he had spent every day since proving that he was strong enough to lead. He had won battles, protected his people, and built alliances with neighboring packs. But there was one thing he had never been able to do. He had never found someone he could trust completely. The war with the Blackthorn pack had ended 2 years ago, but it left a scar on Damian that no one could see. During the final battle, a woman he had trusted, a woman he had almost chosen as his mate, betrayed him to the enemy for wealth and power. She had smiled at him for months while planning his downfall. When the truth came out, Damian survived, but something in him closed like a door that refused to open again. Now the Elder Council was pushing him harder than ever to choose a Luna. The pack needed stability, they said. The people needed to see their king with a mate by his side. Damian understood their reasoning, but he could not shake the fear that history would repeat itself. How could he trust that any woman who smiled at him was not simply smiling at his crown? It was his beta, Ronan, who suggested the plan. They were sitting together late one night, sharing a bottle of aged wine, when Ronan said something that changed everything. "If you want to know someone's heart," Ronan said, "take away everything that makes people want you. See who stays." Damian sat with those words for a long time. By morning, he had made his decision. He would disguise himself as a common stable hand and live among his own pack, unrecognized. He would watch how people treated a man with nothing before he decided who deserved to stand beside a king. Ronan helped him plan every detail. They spread word through the castle that the Alpha King had left on a long diplomatic journey to the eastern packs, a trip that would keep him away for many weeks. Only Ronan and 2 trusted guards knew the truth. Damian shaved the neat edges of his beard into something rougher, dressed in worn clothes, and rubbed dirt into his hands, until they looked like they belonged to someone who worked the stables every day of his life. He introduced himself to the pack as Dan, a wandering wolf looking for honest work. The stable master, an old wolf named Old Tomas, took him in without asking many questions. Extra hands were always welcome, and Dan proved himself useful quickly, mucking stalls, brushing down horses, and lifting heavy bales of hay without complaint. Damian had never done physical labor like this before, and by the end of his first day, his arms ached and his back was sore in ways he had never felt as a king. But there was something freeing about it too. For the first time in years, no one looked at him with fear or ambition in their eyes. They simply saw a stable hand named Dan. It did not take long for Damian to learn how differently people treated someone with no name and no title. The daughters of the pack's noble families, many of whom had been vying for the position of Luna, treated him like he was invisible, or worse. Serafina, the daughter of a wealthy pack elder, was the cruelest of them all. She had her eyes set on the Luna crown, and made sure everyone knew it. When Damian, still in his disguise, accidentally bumped into her at a feast while carrying a tray of drinks, she shrieked as though he had committed a terrible crime. Wine spilled onto her expensive gown, and though it was a small accident, she demanded he be punished. The guards, following her orders without knowing their king was the one being disciplined, gave him 10 lashes in front of the gathered crowd. Damian gritted his teeth through the pain, not because of the lashes themselves, but because of what they revealed. Serafina had smiled at him during pack gatherings before, when she believed he might one day return as the king's guest of honor. But the moment she saw him as nothing more than a servant, her true nature showed itself completely. Other pack members were not as cruel as Serafina, but many were simply indifferent. They walked past him without a glance, too busy with their own lives to notice a stable hand struggling to carry water buckets or falling asleep in the hayloft after a long day of work. Damian began to understand, more deeply than any council meeting could have taught him, how easy it was for people to overlook those who had nothing to offer them. Then there was Ren. Ren was an Omega, quiet and unassuming, who lived in a small cottage near the edge of the Packlands. She had lost both her parents in the same war that had taken Damien's father, and she had no wealth, no title, and no family name to protect her. She worked at the Pack's bakery, waking before dawn to help knead dough and bake bread for the entire village. The first time she noticed Dan, he was sitting alone near the stables during his lunch break, staring at an empty hand because he had forgotten to bring food that day. Ren did not know him, had never spoken to him before, but she walked over without hesitation and handed him a warm piece of bread wrapped in cloth. "You look like you could use this," she said, her voice gentle. "I always make extra." Damien, surprised, tried to refuse at first, embarrassed that a stranger had noticed his hunger, but Ren simply placed the bread in his hands and smiled before walking away, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to share food with someone she barely knew. From that day on, small moments like this became common. Ren would bring him bread on days she noticed he looked tired. She would ask about his day, genuinely curious about his answers, never treating him as though his opinions mattered less because of his low rank. When other pack members laughed at the calluses on his hands or the dirt under his nails, Ren was quick to defend him, telling them that honest work was nothing to mock. One evening, during the lunar festival, Damien found himself sitting alone at the edge of the celebration. Everyone else had gathered in groups, laughing and dancing, but as a stable hand with no family in the pack, he had no one to sit with. He watched from a distance, feeling more isolated than he had in years, even surrounded by hundreds of his own people. Ren found him there, sitting under a tree away from the fires and music. She sat down beside him without being asked, and for a while they said nothing at all. Then she began to talk, telling him about her parents, about the little jokes her father used to make, and the songs her mother used to sing while baking. She asked about his life too, careful never to push too hard, but genuinely wanting to know him. "I don't have much family left," she admitted, looking up at the stars, "but I think the people you choose to care about become family too, even without blood ties." Damien felt something shift in his chest that night, something he had not felt in years. It was not the excitement of meeting someone beautiful or powerful. It was the quiet comfort of being truly seen by another person, without any expectation attached. He began to realize that his feelings for Ren were growing into something deeper than simple gratitude. She had every reason to be bitter about her circumstances, having lost her family and her security to the same war that shaped his own losses. Yet instead of becoming hardened, she had chosen kindness. She gave warmth to a stranger who could offer her nothing in return, not wealth, not status, not even a real name. Weeks passed, and Damien's test seemed to be reaching its natural conclusion. He had seen enough cruelty from Seraphina and her circle to know they could never be trusted with the pack's future, and he had seen enough kindness from Ren to know that his heart, once closed, had slowly begun to open again. But before he could reveal the truth, danger arrived at the pack's borders. Rogue wolves, wild and lawless, launched a surprise attack one night, testing the pack's defenses in a way that had not happened since the war. Alarms rang through the village, and every able wolf rushed to defend the borders, including Damien, still disguised as Dan. He fought fiercely, his training as a warrior king serving him well, even in his disguise. He protected several villagers from harm, including an elderly couple who could not run fast enough on their own. But during the chaos, he took a deep wound to his side, a blow meant for one of the young guards standing nearby. Damien collapsed after the fighting ended, his vision blurring from blood loss. Word spread quickly through the pack that a stable hand named Dan had been gravely injured defending the village. Most people simply noted it as unfortunate news, another casualty in a night of chaos. But Ren, hearing the news while helping tend to other wounded villagers, dropped everything and ran to the healer's den. She stayed by his side through the entire night, holding his hand as the healers worked to stop the bleeding. Other villagers who passed by whispered that she was wasting her time on someone so unimportant, a mere stable hand who would recover or not without her constant attention. But Ren ignored them all, refusing to leave until she was certain he would live. It was in the early hours of the morning, as dawn began to break through the healer's window, that Damien finally opened his eyes and found Ren still sitting beside him, exhausted but awake. "Why did you stay?" he asked, his voice weak. "Because you matter," she said simply. "Rank or no rank, name or no name, you matter." Damien knew then that he could no longer hide the truth. He took a slow breath and told her everything. He told her about the disguise, about the test, about his true identity as the Alpha King of the Silver Crescent Pack. Ren's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she said nothing at all. She pulled her hand back, embarrassed and confused, insisting that she had done nothing special, that anyone would have done the same for an injured stranger. But Damien reached for her hand again, holding it gently. "Not everyone would have," he said. "You loved me as a person before you ever knew I was a king. That is exactly why you deserve to stand beside me." News of the Alpha King's return, and the truth of his disguise, spread through the pack within days. Serafina and the other nobles who had shown cruelty during his time, as Dan grew pale with fear, realizing their own sovereign had witnessed their true nature firsthand. The Elder Council, though initially shocked by the unconventional test, could not argue with what it revealed. In the weeks that followed, Damien formally announced Ren as his chosen Luna before the entire pack. He restored her family's old standing, honoring the parents she had lost, and made it clear that true worth was measured by character, not birth or wealth. Those who had shown unkindness during his disguise were quietly removed from positions of influence within the pack, a consequence of their own actions rather than punishment for ambition alone. Some elders worried that an Omega with no great family name would struggle to lead as Luna, but it did not take long for the pack to understand exactly why Damien had chosen her. Ren brought the same warmth to her new role that she had shown a stranger with nothing to offer. She visited the sick, remembered the names of every pack member she met, and never let her new title change the kindness that had always defined her. Damien, for his part, never forgot the lesson his disguise had taught him. True loyalty was never given to a crown or a title. It was given freely, to a person, by those whose hearts were kind enough to see worth in others, regardless of what they could gain in return. Years later, when their own children asked how their parents met, Damien would tell them the story of a stable hand named Dan, and an Omega who shared her bread with a stranger, expecting nothing in return. And every time he told it, he would remind them that the truest measure of anyone's heart is not how they treat a king, but how they treat someone who has nothing at all to give back.